Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and today I'm proud to bring you Living Hellenismos with Tony Mierzwicki. Greetings, Tony. How are you today?
I'm doing really well today, Hercules, and I'm really excited to have today's guest on, Karen Tate. I've actually known Karen for many, many years, and she's a super nice person. She has a new book out called Normalizing Abuse, a commentary on the culture of pervasive abuse. And I recently reviewed this book for my Pathos blog, Holistic Spirituality, in May 2023, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about it. But first, let's have a look at her background. Thought leader, speaker, 7 times published author, podcaster, and social justice activist, Karen is a caring economy conversation leader and power of partnership presenter. She has a certification from Smith College in the psychology of political activism, women changing the world, and she can be seen in the award-winning docufilm Femme, Women Healing the World. She has been named one of the 13 most influential women in goddess spirituality. Her newest book, Normalizing Abuse, a commentary on our pervasive culture of abuse, is scheduled to be published in January, along with the return of her long-running podcast, Voices of the Sacred. Karen, thank you so much for making yourself available and coming on the show. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. And I want to thank you both for having me. And, it's been a long time since we've seen each other, Tony. It's so nice to speak to you again and see your face.
It is nice. And for the benefit of our viewers, Karen was a regular presenter at Pagan Pride Day, and she would also hold wisdom circle meetings, sometimes at her place, sometimes in the houses of other people in the LA area, and they were always a lot of fun, lots of stimulating discussions. So I'm feel very blessed to have been part of Karen's life for many, many years, and glad that she's on the show. So let's get started. Karen, many people know you from your decades of priestess work in the goddess community, and some might be aware that you went off the grid for several years, starting in 2018 until you were back in the public eye, teaching and podcasting again in January this year. And with your return, we learn about your new book, Normalizing Abuse, a commentary on pervasive abuse in our culture. Did you go off grid to write the book?
No, it was really a forced exit from the world, Tony. A lot of people didn't know about it because I didn't really talk much about it, because in the beginning I didn't understand the profound effect it was going to have on me. But I was actually attacked by someone wielding a stun gun.
Oh my God.
Yeah, a young woman. She looked like she was a college girl. You would never in a million years have thought you needed to be wary. And she showed up, at my building where I lived and worked, and she thought I had her phone. And I could not convince her I didn't have her phone. I had never seen her before. That minute, she popped up in front of me. Why she thought I had her phone, I have no idea. And as crazy and random as that all sounds, when I couldn't produce the phone, she attacked me with the stun gun. So that was the start of it. It was a day that changed my life. Little did I know in that moment how much, but I slowly started to have symptoms of PTSD, post-traumatic stress. And I started retreating from the community more and more. I was afraid to go places where there were strangers, take car trips, was having terrible nightmares, a whole assortment of things. I mean, I'd hear the floorboards creak in the house, and I would literally think the house was going to collapse. I know that sounds irrational, but the therapists call it, you think everything's going to turn into a catastrophe, even if logically and rationally, it wouldn't or couldn't. And so I was dealing with that, trying to, deal with those symptoms. And Roy fell and hit his head and suffered a brain injury.
Oh, no.
Well, and I mean, and I'm, I'm not talking about just a concussion and he was fine in a few days. I mean, it was like a light switch, and he just totally lost himself. And, I lost my partner of 30 plus years. His personality was practically gone. We lost our jobs, the roof over our head, our income. We were forced, to an isolated place that, that we could afford to live. And, and it was really a double-edged sword. I think in that isolation, it really triggered my anxieties tremendously, especially when we would get snowed in because we were up at like 5,000 feet. But it also, the flip side of that was we were in nature. It was quiet. It helped us heal. We were safe during COVID. So, it was, it was this situation where there was an awful lot of bad, but an awful lot of good. And during that time was also during the upheaval, of all the political stuff going on. And as part of my healing process, I really had to reflect on my life. And it's kind of like when you visit Greece and, you see on all the healing temple walls of Asclepius, know thyself. Well, when I was lucky enough to go to Greece, I didn't think about that as in depth as I was forced to when we were up on the mountain. But I really understood it, that saying on a totally different level, because I had to reflect back on my entire life and really dig deep and really know myself and figure myself out in ways that I never really been forced to look at before. And as a result of that, one of the good things that came out of it was this book, because I did delve deeper into, these ideas of, the type of society that we're living in right now.
And for anyone who hasn't read the book yet, it actually is quite amazing. There's so much material in it. It's a very personal book for you, but it's also a book that gives people a lot of clues for what they can do in order to heal and repair their own lives. So it sounds like the last few years of your life were a journey of awakening. Were there any other events that you could share that set you on this path of discovery?
Well, I really had to, look deep into things that had happened in my life and see how they were affecting me now. And because I think what I learned during all of this is you might escape trauma or abuse. But if you just escape it without looking at it and dealing with it and healing from it, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a wound. It can so easily get ripped off, and then you still have the gaping wound that hasn't really healed. So, there was a lot of talk therapy and, alternative healing methods like shamanic journey work. For a while I did, take antidepressants to try to help, tamp down, the anxiety. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking me, but that was, part of this process of discovery.
Okay. So you've published 6 books prior to this one, and all of them were sacred feminine related. Yet this book you've described as where self-help, alternative spirituality, and social justice meet. So at first glance, some might see it as a departure from your goddess work. Is it?
Well, believe it or not, at first I thought it was. But then it dawned on me, it's really not. It's really just a deeper dive and a continuation. And I realized that when I was going back through a lot of my classes that I had on video that I had done over at the Goddess Temple down in Orange County, or at Pagan Pride Days, and the Parliament of World Religions, places like that, I realized that, because I was in Riane Eisler's Partnership Society, I had already been talking about our dominator culture. That's about, what we encounter in life. We have to look at it and determine, well, is this situation one of domination, or is this situation one of partnership? Because most of what we live in this culture, this patriarchal culture, is domination, especially if you're a woman, or you're Black, or you're brown, or you're poor. And but so I knew about patriarchy, I knew about predator capitalism, but this took it that much deeper, because what I really started to get into was really the nuts and bolts of how we, how consent is manufactured in society, how drip by drip, things that are not normal, that should never be normal, or normalized. And, they say, oh, well, that's just the way it is. Or, humans have always been violent, or, nothing to see here, look the other way. When really we should be looking, and we should be rejecting these things. And so in the book, what I did was I took, I don't know, probably 8 chapters, and I talk about abuse in academia, abuse in religion, abuse in the media, in the workplace, family and friends, society and culture, politics, the military, all of these different aspects of our life. And I unpack things that are just normal. We accept them as normal, but if we really look at it, it's abuse and exploitation. And I think we have sanitized things, we have whitewashed things, so that we can function, but in reality, I think we are just enduring abuse on a daily basis, and it results in a traumatized society. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, if you will.
Mm. So you're basically saying that we're all normalizing abuse to survive. I'm sure that there are lots of people out there who think that that's an exaggeration. Would you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'm sure they do. Okay, for instance, if you go to work and your boss tells you to do something that's against the law, what do? Say you're in the personnel office and he says, well, look, I need you to gather up some applications because I want to fill this position, but I don't want a woman, I don't want a Black person, and I don't want somebody over 55. Well, he's telling, that's against the law, that's discrimination. Think of an NDA, for instance, a non-disclosure agreement. A non-disclosure agreement used to be something that you would sign when you worked for an employer, when you left, so that you couldn't steal their intellectual property. But now that's really shifted, and non-disclosure agreements are used routinely by bad actors to cover up their dirty deeds. I mean, there are countless things. I actually put a call out to the community and said, tell me about your examples of abuse and exploitation. Think of this one. I mean, this is sort of a systemic one, but it's still one. We say, okay, women don't get equal pay. That's income disparity. Well, income disparity is kind of the sanitized term, but really what it is an exploitation of women's labor. They're getting less, than maybe a man for the same job. And it results in 70% of women retiring in poverty by the time they retire. That's one example. Or in academia, for instance, the people who are deciding what you're going to learn in school or college, they could be good actors or they can be bad actors. I interviewed Richard Wolff on my radio show. He's an economist. He said that in so many colleges, professors can't talk about the dangers and damage that capitalism does if they expect to get tenure. Well, I think that's an abuse or exploitation of their position, because they're supposed to be educating the public. They're not supposed to be they're not supposed to be taking a position. So the result is, you poll Americans in this country and they've been brainwashed to think socialism is bad. They don't even know what democratic socialism is. And they all go rah, 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 capitalism, even though it's killing them, I mean, there's so many different examples, people whose spouses died on the job, and then the companies tried to cheat the widow out of benefits. The normal sort of stuff you hear all the time, abuse in the work, sexual abuse in the workplace. But I don't want people to think that this is a book about sexual abuse. It's just one of the hundreds of thousands of abuses and exploitations that happen. And it's a spectrum. It goes from verbal abuse, when somebody tells you, you're never, you're no good, you're never going to amount to anything, you're worthless, to maybe killing somebody, and all manner of abuse and exploitation in between. Look at corporations right now, during the, after the pandemic, all we heard was supply chain problems, supply chain problems. They use that excuse to jack up all the prices, right? But then they post record-breaking profits. Well, if they were really having, that big of an issue, would they still have record-breaking profits? Did they really have to shrink those Reese cups, 50% less, but charge you 50% more? No, it was exploitation. So I mean, it's just all over in all sorts of different areas in our lives, and I think it needs to be looked at, because we are just accepting it. It feels overwhelming, and I don't think we should continue to endure it. I mean, greed is another big one. Remember when greed used to be one of the 7 deadly sins? Well, no more. Remember when Christianity used to be about the teachings of Jesus? Now it's about prosperity gospels, which ties into capitalism, So there's so many different things, Tony.
Yeah. So moving back to your book, you mentioned past life regressions and your Saturn return playing a part in helping you along your path. Can you share this with our listeners?
Well, yeah, that was part of the reflection process, I apologize up front to the astrologers out there, and could probably do a better job of explaining this than I can do. But I learned that, we generally have 2 Saturn returns in our life, I think. One's at about 30 and another's at about 60. And if we live long enough, maybe we'll have a third at 90, right? And it's usually a time when we reflect. And we look back on, the previous years of our life, and, sometimes it includes a big change. And as I was doing this reflection up on the mountain, having to look back into my life and dig out, ugliness that maybe I had stuffed away so that I could heal from it, or, I came into the awareness of the second, of the returns, and at first it was like, okay, let me just see if this is a real thing. Does it really seem to be accurate? And it actually did. Because I looked at where my life was when I was about 30. And that was when Roy and I left New Orleans. So here we were leaving the Bible Belt of New Orleans for California. And we were leaving everything behind. It was an external shift and an internal shift. We left all of our friends, our family, our job, everything we knew in the place that we grew up, and we moved to California and had this total new horizon before us. But before I know it, it also resulted in an internal shift, because I'm here to tell you, and I'm not, I'm ashamed to say it, but there's a positive to it. When I grew up in the South, I grew up like so many other people, watching Fox News, thinking Rush Limbaugh was a king, thinking there was nothing wrong with racism and white supremacy, because that's what everybody I knew thought. And that was just how we were indoctrinated, how we were brainwashed. We didn't even question it. And that, and those belief systems, I think that's a strategy between academia, politics, even capitalism. They want those belief systems in place, because capitalism needs an underdog to exploit, to make money. So again, here we go, abuse and exploitation. But anyway, so then I get to California and I discover the feminine face of God. And that just changed my life forever. I became a student of Riane Eisler and Merlin Stone, and and goddess spirituality and paganism, and became an ecofeminist, and totally shifted that whole belief system, realized the error of those ways, and how toxic it was, and and abusive to certain classes of people, and exploitative to certain classes of people. And now I'm a social justice activist, teaching about goddess as deity, archetype, and ideal. So that first Saturn return was about that shift. But then the second Saturn return was after the stun gun incident and after Roy's brain injury. And, it really took me in, on an even deeper level. And I honestly do believe the suffering, the hardship, the loss, it changed me. I became so much more empathetic and patient and compassionate. Before I was just busy and driven and always had 12 balls in the air. And, I didn't stop and think, well, maybe the widow down the street could use help, could use some support, that sort of thing. And so it was just another time of reflection to sort of take stock, almost like we do at the end of, end of the wheel of the year. When we take stock of the, of the previous year, and look at what worked for us and what doesn't work, so that we can marinate on it in the darkness of the winter, and then maybe rebirth ourselves, with the coming of the light. It's kind of that, but on a much more grand scale, if you will, these Saturn returns.
So I assume the goddess or the sacred feminine still play a big part in your life?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as deity, archetype, and ideal, I know to some people it's probably anti-intellectual to believe that, that they can pray to, a deity in the heavens, and that somebody up there actually is looking out for you. Well, whether someone up there is actually looking out for you, or maybe you just connect with the cosmic web, or the Akashic record, or the divine source, whatever you call it, I do believe there's an intelligence out there that somehow we can connect with. I've had too many things happen that kind of defy logic, that, and I'm a Virgo, and I'm analytical, so I don't want to delude myself, but I still believe in that. And, and I look at goddess really as an archetype too, a role model, like especially for women. Women need the goddess because they need to know to value themselves and have esteem, because so many grow up thinking that God is, men are only in God's image. They don't know about the sacred feminine, so they never learn that, well, women are in the image of deity as well. But mostly for me these days, it's about the values, because it's those values of the sacred feminine that I feel that are missing from society that can change the world if we would incorporate them and make those at the center of our life rather than the patriarchal values that don't revere life, and it's about domination and all the things that are wrong with the world right now, it seems.
In your book, you wrote that the goddesses Isis and Sekhmet were important in your self-healing process. Are they the most important goddesses that you work with?
They are, but I've also worked with Aphrodite, and I've worked with Kali, and I even worked with Hermes, believe it or not, and Anubis. And worked with them, for different reasons. I learned about Aphrodite and Hermes being, in ancient times, being seen as like this power couple for politicians in the day, and I read that, Hermes, well, that they would, make offerings to Aphrodite because she could help people like them and maybe want to vote for them and choose them, but then they also needed Hermes to kind of get their message out. So I kind of used them when I needed to sell a piece of property. I used magical tools and invoked Aphrodite and Hermes to sell a piece of property that we had that we really needed the money from. But also Aphrodite about the idea of self-worth, because that was really a wound of mine. I never felt like I was good enough. I didn't grow up in a world where there was a female face of God. Instead, I grew up in this culture where women were second class and had to submit to male authority, and we didn't learn to trust our intuition and our judgment, and also too, I believe Aphrodite is so much more than about just she's more than like a boudoir babe, so to speak. I think she helps us she helps us learn about our self-worth, but I think she also helps us understand that it goes so much further beyond our physical beauty. So I would call on Aphrodite for things like that. Sekhmet, she really came into my life when I felt like I needed strength, courage, healthy boundaries. And Isis, well, Isis was the first goddess that I felt, that I was called to. So she was there from the very beginning, and she'll always sort of be like the big umbrella, that everybody else fits under.
Yeah, I mean, by late antiquity, she basically assumed all the other goddesses within her. She was pretty close to the ultimate goddess. In our private communications leading up to this interview, you mentioned that you were also working with Asclepius and Thoth. So I was wondering how you work with divinities, and perhaps could you walk us through a short ritual? I'm just curious how you work with them, and people might be inspired to try doing things your way rather than the way that they're doing it.
Well, I have to tell you, as I've gotten older, my rituals have gotten less elaborate. And if I were to analyze them, they probably are colored by my Christian background, but it usually involves an altar, and you know, a picture or statue of the deity. And you know, like any other ritual, you know, invoke the deity, um, you know, tell them how wonderful they are and why you appreciate them and you need them in your life, and you know, why they're so important. You know, you know, ask them to please help you with your petition. You know, and I don't know, I look at the relationship with deity as reciprocity. You know, I don't think it's like going to an ATM machine where you just take out, take out, take out. You know, I believe in being of service and I believe in giving back. So, you know, if I ever get to the point where something is bad enough that I need to call on deity, because I don't really do it on a regular basis. I do it when I'm really afraid or in dire straits, or think I really need divine help because the situation is so much bigger than me, right? But I always, you know, say, please help me, and I will, you know, I will continue to be your priestess. I will do this or that or the other thing. I mean, like when uh, I was trying to get my first book published, and I probably had 50 rejection letters on the wall, right? And so I prayed to Isis, and I said, you know, Isis, I believe this is what I'm being called to do, but look at the rejection letters. You know, you know, I'm kind of getting the message. Maybe this isn't what I'm supposed to do. So, if you, you know, if you can help me get a book published, I will dedicate the book to you. And it was also to Toth as well, to her and Toth. And so what happened was, one of my coven sisters sent me a clipping from a magazine she had, and it was this publisher, CCC Publishing. And she said, Karen, look, I know, you know, it's a small publisher. You know, he's doing mostly travel stuff, but what do you have to lose? Why don't you think about sending him a proposal? So I sent him a proposal, and he wrote back to me and he said, well, I don't want to publish the book you're asking me to publish. However, I want you, because of what I see in your book, and you've traveled to all of these sacred sites, I'd like you to publish the next book in my travel series. So that's what kicked off my entire writing career. And it taught me that, you know, when we're doing our magic, that we really have to let the universe or goddess or God have a hand in how it's going to unfold. Because I thought my first book was going to be what it actually turned out to be my second book, because once I had the first book published, I had no trouble getting the other book published, which had all those rejection letters on the wall, right? So, but you know, Asclepius, you know, Asclepius is usually, you know, about healing. I mean, the ritual generally takes the same format for me. Although I will say, when I was trying to sell that property, I took images of Hermes and Aphrodite and buried them in the land with the offerings. And it wasn't long after that that I did get you know, did get an offer on the property. So yeah, so it's about asking for what you need, making a promise of something you will, you know, do in return, because that's like a sacrifice, right? I think we do have to make some sort of you know, monetary, energetic sacrifice in return. You know, we just can't take, want. And I don't know, that's sort of my, you know, just you know, go-to type ritual, unless it's something real elaborate like the Isis rituals and stuff we used to do on the beach. Those are the kinds of things I do at my altar, and it usually involves incense and colored candles, and, you know, maybe a particular food or drink that I know the deity is supposed to like, you know, make that offering to them as well. You know, the typical stuff we learn in, you know, Ritual 101.
Can we go back to your real estate ritual? I understand why you'd use Hermes. Hermes was a god of boundaries. He was also a god of commerce, apart from his better known aspects of travel and communication. But why Aphrodite? And with this particular ritual, is this something that's specific to that one piece of land you're trying to sell? Or would this be a ritual that would work for all real estate?
Well, here was my logic behind it. Okay. Hermes is about a messenger. He is about getting the word out, right? I needed people to know that land was for sale. I needed
Okay.
people to know that it was desirable. I wanted them, I wanted them to see it was desirable. I wanted them to see it was at a decent price. So I felt like it was up to, I was putting it in his hands to be the communicator. He was going to communicate that land was available. Aphrodite, on the other hand, she's about drawing people to you, to gain their favor. You want them to like you. So with her, it was more about, I wanted him to see that piece of property and fall in love with it. Fall in love with the location, fall in love with what the land looked like, fall in love with I don't know, whatever there was about the location of the property. So she was about the desire for the property. But first, Hermes had to get the person to the property by sending out the message that, it was there, and entice them and come see it. She was more about enticement and desire to buy it. Make sense? It's kind of like
Yeah.
a relationship in a way. I mean, this was my thinking.
No, it actually makes perfect sense, and I love the way that you walked us all through it. And I'm thinking, yeah, I might try something very similar to that
And I
in the
think you could do
future.
it with something besides property, something you need to get the word out about something, and you want them to like it. I mean, it could be whatever say you're a painter, you
Mm,
know, and you need clients to come buy your paintings. Well, Hermes, he's got to get the word out there that you're this wonderful painter. And Aphrodite's got to make the people love your painting and draw them in and entice them to buy it. I mean, that's the way I look at them as a couple, because, I read in ancient times, that's what the politicians would do. They wanted people to vote for them. So Aphrodite was the one they used to try to get the vote. She helped them, get the people to cast the vote, but their message about who they were and what they were going to do for the people, well, that went out. That was Hermes's job.
wow. This is really cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. And I suppose in the case of a painter, they'd be calling on Athena to help them with the creative process. So yeah, it's a matter of intelligently using the various gods and goddesses. So I was wondering, what other remedies did you use to escape the trauma and heal from abuse and exploitation that you might share with our listeners?
Well, like I said, the isolation was a double-edged sword. While it was really hard for us living an hour from everything, it did give us quiet time to reflect without the stressors of being in a congested city with all the tension like we were in
Mm,
Venice there. But I would wake up with heart palpitations. I would be doing mantras and breathing exercises. I did shamanic journey work. I did traditional stuff too. I did talk therapy, tapping. I did, a little bit of antidepressants. I'm trying to think of everything. Exercise. exercise helped. Um, I had kind friends who listened to me,
Yeah.
because, just talking to a therapist didn't do it. But, friends who stuck by me who didn't mind, every time I peeled away a layer of the onion. It was really a lot of different things. It was kind of an integration. But it was also then getting out of there, because I couldn't continue to live there, I realized. And talk about double-edged swords, I, and I hope this isn't too graphic, but, we're all adults here. I had a medical condition, that women get, called, hemorrhaging, bleeding fibroids. And they were fine until we ended up on the mountain. And I mean, they were in check, let's put it that way. They were in check and not giving me any terrible problems until we got up on the mountain. And I think it just became overwhelming anxiety. And I really started to hemorrhage. And I started working with doing shamanic journey work to get in better touch with my body. And because I lived a lot in my head, and I didn't have a close body mind connection. And I tried to have a better relationship with my body. But it still turned out that I ended up needing a hysterectomy. And one of my friends, I called on her, she'd been friends of mine for like 20 years. And I said, look, can you drive me home from the hospital? Because, Roy can't drive. And hospital was about an hour and a half away. And she said, oh, can't you just tough it out and drive yourself home?
Wow.
And, and
Wow.
yeah, I mean, and talk about a knife in my heart. But, Tony, I told her later, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, that ended up being a gift, because it was the last straw on the camel's back that told me I had to get off that mountain. I couldn't keep going through the winters with 3 feet of snow, not being, being afraid that I wasn't going to be able to shovel the driveway. I wasn't going to be able to drive down the curvy mountain road. It was the straw that broke the camel's back that told me I had to get out of there. And so, that was a really hard thing to have to hear, but in the end, it was a gift. It pried me out of there to go look for another place to live, pack up the house and move. So, I think it was just so much internal reflection, and that goes back to what's on the temple walls and Asclepius's temples, know thyself. I think we have so many distractions, and I'm probably not different than a lot of people. We don't want to look at the hard stuff. We don't want to look at the ugly stuff. It's easier to go play a video game or watch TV or read a book. But I think until we do look at the ugly or the wounded, we're never free of it, and we have to be free of it so it doesn't keep coloring how we see ourselves and the world around us, and so it doesn't keep affecting maybe even the decisions we make.
One thing that I'm getting very strongly from what you're saying is that even though you weren't totally happy at the top of the mountain, you kind of adapted to it. And I think a lot of people just become comfortable in a situation, even if the situation isn't optimal. So one message that people could possibly get from your book is the importance of using discernment, having a look at your circumstances and seeing whether there is scope for change. I mean, you shouldn't really put up with suboptimal conditions.
Yeah, we can't get comfortable with abuse. We can't get comfortable with exploitation. We can't get comfortable with, as you say, suboptimal conditions. We really do have to, get more comfortable with uncertainty, get more comfortable with change. You know, and I think if we do this in baby steps, we build up our confidence so that when we have to make a bigger decision or make a bigger move, you know, we have the confidence to do it, if that makes sense, you know,
Mm.
because we could have stayed up on that mountain, but you know, we wanted a better quality of life, you know. We didn't want to settle for that. And I think it wasn't just a matter of settling. And for me, it was also about, I didn't want to keep living with the anxiety that living up on the mountain produced in me too, you know, because there were so many things beyond our control, and I was always waiting for the next shoe to drop. You know, I couldn't quite ever relax. But you know, I think it's like the devil we know. You know, you think about domestic violence. You know, women often stay with abusive men because it's even though it's abuse, it's familiar. They know what to expect, right? And
Mm.
we can't do that in our lives. We can't stay with the abusive boss. We can't stay with the abusive father, husband, mother, you know, whoever it is, the person that whose toxicity is affecting our quality of life. And I think if somebody says to you, "Oh, tough it out," or "work harder," or you know, I don't think they're our friend. You know, I think the person who nurtures us and says, "Well, how is your quality of life? You know, what can I do to help you?" You know, those are the people who I think care about us and want the best for us. You know, I wish more people, I wish anyone had said to me, "How is your quality of life?" You know, rather than, "Well, Karen, you just have to work harder." You know, because
Mm.
working harder isn't always, you know, or be a better wife, or be a better friend, or at Kabbalah Center. You know, I thought I was going to have shoulder surgery, and they told me I wasn't tithing enough. You know, I mean, honestly, at the Kabbalah
Funny
Center
that.
on Robertson, you know, the Karen Berg place. So yeah, I mean, these people, you know, the people that tell us these kinds of things, um, I'm not saying they have you know, an evil agenda, but they may have been conditioned too to believe that stuff, you know, because we get these belief systems in our head from the time we're a child. And, you know, sometimes we just have to break free of them in order to live our best life.
You touched on women remaining in abusive relationships because it's the devil they know, but there's also the codependency factor. Some people can't handle being alone, even though it's very character building to spend some time on your own, work out exactly what it is that you want out of life.
You know, you're absolutely right. It's not always just everything's on one person and the other person is the total good guy, right? I mean, I think it's the same in say, in a workplace situation. You know, your boss may be an abuser, but you have to have the confidence, the self-esteem to look for another job, and not just become codependent, if you will, you know, with that job, if that makes sense.
Mm.
You know, you just can't. I mean, look, we have free will, but yet people stay at bad jobs. They stay in bad marriages. They stay in bad friendships. You know, and I think it's because you know, we're afraid to, you know, we don't want to be uncomfortable. We're afraid of the unfamiliar. And women especially, you know, women, we've been conditioned to be second class. You know, we're told, I mean, maybe not younger women now, you know, women who are 20, 30, maybe even 40, but I'm 65, Tony. You know, I'm not in my mother's generation, but I'm not a millennial either, right? You know, I think the younger people coming up now are smarter and savvier, and they have a lot more positive reinforcement out there. But especially growing up in the South, you know, women aren't taught to be independent. Men want them to be codependent. And I feel like that's a lot of what the Roe v. Wade thing is about. You know, they want women saddled with children, so that they can't become independent, so that they don't have economic freedom. You know, they want women in a position where they have to tolerate maybe bad actors, bad husbands, or bad you know, bosses or whatever. They want them to settle for less. And you know, and I think it's a hardship that women endure in some families and in some societies and in some religions, that they're conditioned to be dependent. You know, and especially on a man. You know, the man's the guy who's going to ride in on the white horse and, you know, solve all of her problems and take care of her for the rest of her life. I mean, you know, that's how some women are conditioned and brainwashed. But, you know, I go back to ISIS's sistrum, you know, about this idea of we have to shake things up. I read that Herodotus talked about the sistrum of Isis and Bast and Hathor. And he said when Isis shook her sistrum, it kept the energies of the universe flowing. Now, I extrapolated that to you know, because I feel like that was a metaphor. I extrapolate that to mean we have to constantly be stirring our cauldron. You know, we can't come complacent. We can't become too comfortable. We can't, you know, become complicit. We have to become comfortable with the unfamiliar so that we continue to grow, you know, grow as people. And I don't know, that's the way I'm thinking these days, that, you know, you know, that's kind of a metaphor for our life, that, you know, shaking the sistrum, you know, keeping the energies in our life flowing, you know, don't stay stuck at a bad job, in a bad relationship, you know, with a bad professor, with a politician who isn't looking out for you, you know, whoever it is. Don't stay stuck with them because they're familiar. Take a chance on something else that's maybe not familiar, but you have a chance at something better.
That's actually a fascinating way of looking at the system. I note that you're not a psychologist, so I was wondering, from what perspective did you write your book?
Well, yeah, you know, I just sort of wrote this as an every woman researcher, layperson. You know, I did research into how our brain works and why humans do the things that they do, and did historical research. You know, I don't profess to be a psychologist or a licensed therapist or anything like that. But I did an awful lot of reading and conveyed in the book in very easy to understand terms what I just said, actually, you know, because when we start to see patterns that humans fall into, you know, we can kind of recognize maybe things we do or our friends do, or I don't know, the guy on TV is doing, or something like that. And we start to recognize the behaviors. And I'll tell you one thing, that when I used to see people doing bad things, I used to be really judgmental and go, wow, what a horrible person. Now, you know, 9 times out of 10, I'll go, gee, I wonder what happened to them in their life to make them want to do that. Because I really look at all of the abuse out there. And I would be willing to bet 8, 9 times out of 10, these people are people who have been abused, who've suffered trauma and didn't even know it, but they're acting out. You know, they kicked the dog, or they abused their employee, or you know, whatever. You know, they you know, don't vote for somebody to get food stamps. You know, they'd rather have them starve. You know, I think you know, the people that do the, you know, have these immoral or unethical or cruel outlooks, or people who at some point in their life have probably been abused and maybe didn't even know it was abuse, but now they're a perpetrator of it, you know? That makes sense?
Yeah. So what do you hope that people and perhaps society as a whole will get out of your book?
Well, you know, Tony, if I could just, you know, wake up a few people to the ideas we've talked about, you know, that the stuff that's going on in the world is abuse and exploitation. It's not something we should just accept as normal. That would be a win. It would be an even bigger win if they maybe looked at their life and sort of did an assessment and looked at maybe where they were abused or exploited, or maybe where they've abused others or exploited others, and really did a deep dive into why and how, and somehow have remorse for it and not do it again. I mean, I would like people out there to start looking at the politicians on the television, and see some of their lies and cruelty as not worthy of being public servants. But I think mostly, you know, I would like us to get to a point where, I know this is a big thing, but to work toward, you know, where there's more, where mental health is more of a priority. You know, where we, you know, work toward having a trauma-free society. I mean, I know there's always going to be suffering in the world, right? But there's so much of the suffering is systematic. You know, it's baked into the cake, and you know, we can't. I mean, right now we're on the verge of making everything worse. You know, you know, if we, you know, follow behind this politician or another one, you know, we have to start to say, no, I'm not going to be complicit in this. I'm going to try to do everything I can in my little world to make it better. Even if that means smiling at somebody, talking to a stranger. Look, I know, living in California, I don't think the people who lived in my, you know, in the building where I lived, I don't think most of them knew the person on the other side of the wall, right? Here in Oregon, it's totally different. People, strangers, talk to each other in the line at the grocery store, you know?
Right.
And I think we have to do away with greed. Greed has to become taboo. That would go such a long way. There's so much to be done. I mean, pick something and be in service to it, to, you know, anything to try to make the world a better place. But start with yourself, start with self-care, have gratitude, use compassion, fight for diversity, look at situations and say, is this domination and abuse and exploitation, or is this partnership and love and cooperation? And we want the partnership, love, and cooperation, you know?
At this point, I have to interrupt. We've run out of time. So if you can kindly share how people can contact you, that'd be fantastic.
Thank you. And I'm sorry for going on so long.
It's okay, and we can continue.
No, it's been great.
So yeah, the best place to reach me is my website. That's sort of the hub for everything. And that's my name. It's KarenTate.net. You can find out about the radio show, the books, services, all the rest.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for coming on the show and letting us get to know you a little bit better. I wish you oodles of success with all your future endeavors, and it's been wonderful reconnecting with you. Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you, Tony. I appreciate it. And thank you, Hercules. Nice to
And
meet you.
thank you for all the wonderful information, very compelling. I wish you success with your book and all your endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.